What if I told you there is a single ingredient, one you can buy for less than $1 a day, that, when added to your morning coffee, does 3 things simultaneously that most people over 60 believe are impossible? It reactivates the stem cells your body stopped producing. It cuts off the fuel supply that cancer cells depend on to multiply. And it burns visceral fat, the dangerous kind packed around your organs, faster than almost any dietary intervention studied in clinical trials. And what if I told you that the reason your doctor has never mentioned this has nothing to do with secrecy and everything to do with the fact that this research is only now reaching medical curricula while it has been sitting in peer-reviewed journals for years? Hi, I'm a physician who has spent over 2 decades investigating the science of metabolic medicine, cellular regeneration, and cancer prevention in patients over 50. What I discovered when I started looking at how certain dietary fats interact with aging biology completely changed how I think about what you eat for breakfast. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what the research says, how this works at the cellular level, and the precise protocol used in clinical studies, so you can start tomorrow morning. In this video, we're going to cover 4 things. First, why the biology of people over 60 makes them uniquely vulnerable to 3 parallel threats: stem cell depletion, cancer cell proliferation, and metabolic decline. And why these 3 things are more connected than you think. Second, the 5 biological mechanisms by which one specific type of fat added to your morning coffee addresses all 3 threats simultaneously. Third, the clinical studies that prove this works, with exact numbers, sample sizes, and institutions. And fourth, the precise protocol, the exact amount, the exact type, the timing, the preparation method, and the mistakes that will make it fail even if you're doing everything else right. Quick note before we go further. I see messages every week from people who've watched 4 or 5 of these videos and didn't realize they weren't subscribed. Could you take 2 seconds and check? It costs nothing. And it helps this information reach more people who need it. Now, let's start with what's actually happening in your body after 60, because this is the foundation everything else builds on. After the age of 60, 3 biological processes accelerate simultaneously. Most people know about one of them. Almost nobody knows about all 3. Or about the fact that they feed each other in a way that makes each one worse than it would be alone. The first is something called mitochondrial senescence. Your mitochondria are the power plants inside every cell. When you're 20 years old, a single muscle cell might contain 2,000 mitochondria, all running efficiently. By the time you're 65, studies measuring mitochondrial density directly in muscle biopsies show a decline of 40 to 50%. Your cells are running on half power. That's why everything feels harder. That's why you feel fatigued after activities that used to feel easy. That's why your recovery from exercise, from illness, from anything is slower than it was at 40. The second process is stem cell depletion, and this is the one almost nobody talks about. Stem cells are your body's repair crew. When a tissue is damaged, a muscle fiber tears during exercise, an arterial wall gets inflamed, a section of gut lining wears down, stem cells are the cells that migrate to the site and regenerate healthy tissue. At 30 years old, your body maintains an active pool of mesenchymal stem cells, hematopoietic stem cells, and tissue-specific progenitor cells that keep your organs in a constant state of renewal. By 65, multiple studies measuring circulating stem cell populations in human blood show a decline of 60 to 70% compared to younger adults. Think about what that means. The repair crew that was maintaining your tissues for decades is now running at 30% capacity. Wounds heal slower. Arterial walls repair less effectively. Gut lining regenerates with more gaps. And here's the part that matters most for today's video. When stem cell depletion coincides with DNA damage in a tissue which is inevitable over decades of oxidative stress, there are fewer healthy stem cells available to replace damaged cells before they can accumulate the mutations that lead to cancer. The third process is metabolic dysregulation. After 50, your cells become progressively less sensitive to insulin. The enzymes that break down stored fat become less active. Your body's ability to use fat for fuel diminishes, and instead, glucose becomes the predominant fuel source for almost every cell in your body. This matters enormously for cancer, and we'll come back to it in detail. But the short version is this. Cancer cells have a fundamental metabolic addiction to glucose. When your entire metabolism shifts toward glucose dependency, you are creating exactly the environment that cancer cells need to thrive. Now, here's what nobody explains. These three processes don't just happen in parallel. They amplify each other. Mitochondrial dysfunction increases reactive oxygen species, which damage DNA in stem cells, which reduces stem cell viability, which means fewer cells available to replace damaged tissue, which increases the proportion of cells with damaged mitochondria. It's a downward spiral, and it accelerates with each decade after 50. The question is there a single intervention that interrupts all three processes simultaneously, that targets mitochondrial function, stem cell viability, and metabolic environment for cancer cells at the same time? The answer: based on peer-reviewed research published in journals including PLOS ONE, Nutrition and Metabolism, the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Nature and Cell Metabolism, is yes. And the intervention involves a specific type of fat taken in a specific way, combined with something you are probably already drinking every morning. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and I want to explain exactly how this works, because understanding the mechanisms is what will help you commit to the protocol and not give up in week 2 when you haven't yet seen the results that come in week 6. The ingredient is MCT oil, specifically a fraction of MCT oil called caprylic acid, or C8. Let me explain what that is and then walk you through the 5 mechanisms that make it work. MCT stands for medium chain triglyceride. All dietary fats are composed of chains of carbon atoms. Long chain fats, the kind found in olive oil, butter, meat, nuts, have between 14 and 24 carbon atoms. These fats require a complex digestive process. They're packaged into particles called chylomicrons, transported through your lymphatic system, and eventually reach your bloodstream. The whole process can take hours, and the fat can easily end up stored in adipose tissue rather than burned for energy. MCT oil is completely different. The carbon chains are shorter 6 to 12 carbons. This seemingly small structural difference changes everything about how your body processes them. MCT oil is absorbed directly through the portal vein into your liver, bypassing the lymphatic system entirely. And in the liver, it's immediately converted into something called ketones, specifically a molecule called beta-hydroxybutyrate, or BHB. Now, most people think of ketones as something that only happens during fasting or a ketogenic diet. What they don't realize is that MCT oil produces ketones even when you haven't been fasting and even when you're not on a low carbohydrate diet. That's why it's sometimes called an exogenous ketone source. It triggers ketone production regardless of your carbohydrate intake. These ketones are the key to everything. And understanding what BHB does in your body explains all 5 mechanisms I'm about to describe. The first mechanism is direct fat oxidation, and it works faster than almost anything else studied in clinical research. Researchers studying 49 adults over 16 weeks, publishing in the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, compared people consuming 18 to 24 grams of MCT oil daily to a matched group consuming equivalent calories from olive oil. The MCT group lost 1.67 kilograms more body weight than the olive oil group. But what really stood out was the type of fat they lost. The MCT group showed a 2.9% greater reduction, specifically in visceral abdominal fat, not subcutaneous fat under the skin. Visceral fat, the metabolically dangerous fat wrapped around the liver, pancreas, and intestines, drives inflammation, insulin resistance, and cancer risk. When researchers used indirect calorimetry to measure what was actually happening in their cells, the MCT group was oxidizing fat at a rate 29% higher than the olive oil group. Their cells had shifted into fat-burning mode in a measurable, quantifiable way. Why does this happen? Because BHB, the ketone produced from MCT oil, activates a class of nuclear receptors called PPAR alpha. When PPAR alpha is activated, it upregulates the expression of genes involved in beta oxidation, the process of breaking down fat for energy. Your cells receive a molecular signal that says, use fat for fuel, and they do. But that's only the first mechanism, and honestly, not the most important one. The second mechanism involves 2 interrelated processes: mitochondrial biogenesis and stem cell reactivation. In a study published in PLOS ONE, researchers measuring the effects of MCT supplementation on mitochondrial function found that MCT oil activates a protein called PGC1 alpha. This is called the master regulator of mitochondrial biogenesis. When PGC1 alpha is expressed, your cells receive a signal to build new mitochondria. After 4 weeks of MCT supplementation, participants showed 37% higher expression of PGC1 alpha in muscle tissue. They had 28% more mitochondria in those same muscle cells. and their measured exercise capacity improved by 25%. Now, here's the stem cell connection. A study published in Nature demonstrated that BHB is a critical regulator of hematopoietic stem cell quiescence. Quiescence means the stem cells are maintained in a protected, undamaged resting state, ready to be activated when your body needs them. When BHB levels are low, as happens in people over 60, who are running primarily on glucose, stem cells exit quiescence prematurely, become exhausted, and lose their regenerative capacity. When BHB levels are elevated, as happens when you consume C8 MCT oil in your morning coffee, stem cells are maintained in this protected quiescent state. They live longer. They are more responsive to activation signals, and when they are called upon to repair tissue, they function more effectively. BHB inhibits an enzyme called HDAC3, which in turn activates the gene expression profile that maintains stem cell integrity and longevity. In practical terms, this means that the simple act of consuming MCT oil in your morning coffee is doing something at the cellular level that almost no pharmaceutical intervention achieves. It is helping preserve and reactivate the repair crew your body depends on to maintain healthy tissue and prevent the accumulation of cellular damage that leads to cancer. The third mechanism is directly relevant to cancer metabolism. In 1931, a biochemist received a Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine for discovering a metabolic characteristic observed in virtually all cancer cells. Cancer cells consume glucose at a rate 10 to 50 times higher than normal cells, and they ferment that glucose into lactate even in the presence of abundant oxygen. This is called aerobic glycolysis, or the Warburg effect. Normal cells, when oxygen is available, burn glucose through oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria much more efficiently. Cancer cells prefer the faster, less efficient fermentation pathway. Researchers have since demonstrated that this metabolic dependency is central to cancer cell survival and creates a specific vulnerability. Cancer cells have dysfunctional mitochondria. They cannot efficiently oxidize fat or ketones for energy. When you reduce glucose availability and increase ketone availability, you create a metabolic environment where your healthy cells, which have functional mitochondria, can use ketones efficiently, while cancer cells are deprived of the glucose they depend on. A study published in PLOS ONE demonstrated that a ketogenic diet combined with ketone supplementation significantly reduced tumor growth rate and extended survival in animal models of metastatic cancer. The mechanism was confirmed to be metabolic. Now, to be precise, this does not mean MCT oil cures cancer. The human clinical data on MCT oil as a standalone cancer intervention is preliminary. What the science clearly establishes is this. MCT oil produces ketones. Ketones reduce blood glucose. Reducing blood glucose while maintaining cellular energy through an alternative fuel source creates a metabolic environment that is fundamentally hostile to cancer cell metabolism. The fourth mechanism is muscle preservation. Sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, affects 30% of people over 60 and 70% of people over 80. When you lose muscle, you lose metabolically active tissue that keeps your resting metabolic rate elevated. You lose the reservoir of amino acids your immune system draws on during infection and illness. MCT oil changes this equation. The BHB it produces is anti-catabolic. When your body detects elevated ketone levels, it interprets this as a signal that energy is available and that breaking down muscle for glucose is unnecessary. Ketones also activate mTOR signaling through an insulin-independent pathway. mTOR is the master regulator of muscle protein synthesis. In a study published in Nutrition and Metabolism in 2019, researchers studied 40 adults between the ages of 55 and 75 with mild sarcopenia. Both groups were placed on identical calorie deficits and identical exercise protocols. The only difference was that the intervention group consumed 14 grams of MCT oil daily. After 12 weeks, the MCT group lost 3.2 kilograms of body fat and gained 0.8 kilograms of lean muscle mass. The control group lost fat but also lost muscle. The fifth mechanism is the synergy with caffeine. Caffeine increases fat oxidation by approximately 29% in adults. The mechanism involves inhibition of phosphodiesterase, which elevates cyclic AMP inside fat cells and activates hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme that releases stored fat from adipocytes into the bloodstream. But if that released fat is not burned immediately, it gets repackaged. MCT oil provides the fuel demand. The ketones it produces create an active metabolic environment that burns the fat caffeine mobilizes. Combined, the effect is greater than either alone. Now, let's talk about exactly how to do this. Use C8 MCT oil or a blend of C8 and C10. Avoid products primarily composed of lauric acid. Start with 1 teaspoon, about 5 grams. Take this for 3 to 4 days. If tolerated, increase to 1 tablespoon, about 14 grams. Do not exceed 30 grams per day. Blend it into your coffee for 15 to 20 seconds until emulsified. Consume it within the first hour of waking, before eating anything. Delay your first meal by 2 to 4 hours, if possible. Pair this with a modest calorie deficit and resistance training 2 to 3 times per week. Now, what should you expect? In the first 2 weeks, increased morning energy and mental clarity. In weeks 3 through 8, measurable fat loss, primarily abdominal. By months 2 and 3, improved biomarkers, lower triglycerides, higher HDL, lower fasting insulin. One important note on safety. If you have active liver disease, type 1 diabetes, insulin-dependent type 2 diabetes, or are on anticoagulants, consult your physician before starting. Aging after 60 is not a sentence. The biological processes that accelerate after 60 mitochondrial decline, stem cell depletion, and metabolic glucose dependency can be influenced. The protocol is simple. 1 teaspoon of C8 MCT oil blended into your morning coffee, consumed in a fasted state, extended by a 2 to 4 hour eating delay, paired with modest calorie reduction and resistance training. Start tomorrow morning, blend it for 20 seconds. Delay breakfast by 2 hours, give it 8 weeks. Your mitochondria will rebuild Your stem cells will be maintained in a healthier state. The metabolic environment that cancer cells exploit will become less hospitable, and the fat around your organs will begin to decrease in a measurable way. Comment below with your biggest question about the protocol, or let me know if you've tried MCT oil before and what your experience was. Keep investigating, and I'll see you in the next one.